So today we're going to dive into a pretty complex and frankly provocative text called the January Docket. And it's got this radical theory at its core. What if we've been looking at systemic corruption all wrong? What if it isn't just a bunch of separate crimes, but the actual coordinated behavior of a living, breathing organism?
The author, R.J. Aguirre, wants us to look at the legal system in a completely new way, not as a structure for justice, but as an environment. You know, a habitat that's been taken over by a new kind of predator.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this theory, we've got to wrap our heads around its central idea, which is this really wild biological metaphor.
So the argument goes that this organism works kind of like a parasite. It's not trying to achieve society's goals, nope. It's just manipulating the state for its own ends, its own survival, and its own reproduction.
But it doesn't stop there. The author takes this a whole step further, claiming this isn't just some organism, it's basically a brand new species.
And get this, the author even gives it a scientific name. It's defined as a colonial organism. The idea here is that individual judges aren't just acting on their own. They're more like specialized cells or organs, all working together as one single entity. Think of it like a Portuguese man-of-war. It looks like one jellyfish, right? But it's actually a whole colony of tiny organisms working together.
So, how does the author even justify calling it a new species? Well, they argue it comes down to two key biological principles. First, this group has its own unique characteristics. And second, and this is crucial, it has a totally unique way of reproducing itself.
And this is where the theory gets really, really unconventional. See, the species doesn't reproduce biologically. It reproduces using the machinery of political power.
The theory actually points to a specific political figure as the, and I'm quoting here, reproductive organ. This is the mechanism that allows the judicial species to keep going to perpetuate itself by appointing new judges who then get absorbed into the colony.
Okay, so if this is a system, how do you even measure the power of each piece? How do you quantify it? Well, the source lays out this data-driven approach. It identifies the system's main weapons, and it says they're all about controlling two things: your money and your family.
And we're not talking about an estimate here. The author claims you can calculate a firepower score for every single judge using hard data straight from court records. You just track the exact dollar amounts they move and the number of children affected by their rulings.
So what happens when you actually apply this metric? Well, it leads to a pretty shocking conclusion about who's really at the top of this food chain.
You might think it's the governor, right? I mean, he's the reproductive organ, after all. But the author's data points somewhere else entirely.
So once you apply that firepower score to every judge, this is the picture you get. It's not a flat line, it's a full-on pyramid, a hierarchy, with a definite leader right at the peak.
And that leader, according to the data in the source, isn't the state's chief executive. It's an appellate judge. He's the real apex predator in this ecosystem.
So why him? How does that work? Well, the author states it's because this Chief Justice handles appeals for cases worth billions of dollars. And on top of that, he presides over appeals that affect hundreds of children. That combination gives him the highest firepower score in the whole system.
From there, this whole idea of power expands even further. The author describes how the entire judicial system, we're talking both state and federal, is organized into two separate but coordinated parts.
It's laid out like this. The state courts are the weapon used to go after targets, and the federal courts, they act as the shield, basically running interference and protecting those state actors from ever facing consequences.
Okay, so what's the big takeaway from all this? I mean, it's a really different way of looking at power, right? There's a quote in the source material that just hits you. It really drives home the theory's pretty bleak conclusion. It describes a system that's literally eating its own future, its children, just to feed itself today.
So let's just quickly recap the main ideas we've covered here. We're talking about reframing corruption as a biological organism, measuring power through control of money and family, seeing politicians as reproductive organs, finding a surprising apex predator in the hierarchy, and viewing the courts as this coordinated weapon and shield system.
Look, whether you buy into this whole theory or not, what the author is really doing is offering a totally new framework for understanding institutional power. The idea isn't that it's just a few bad apples, right? It's that maybe the whole orchard is designed this way.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. What if the systems we build can actually take on a life of their own, with their own goals?
that might not have anything to do with ours anymore.